Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for taking some time to come back and join us. This is episode 4, Talking Politics with me, Dr. Brian Baker. I wanted to really dive into some things as it pertains to what the NAACP has decided to do with this out of bounds campaign. Going to talk about that more in just a moment, just to piggyback from what we did last time. But I think it's important for us to understand why it is necessary to take a stand. All right. Following the Supreme Court's decision, the Louisiana versus Calais decision, right, where essentially the Supreme Court, in many regards, their ruling gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act, which has been a pillar of the civil rights movement, something that has been instrumental in making things more equitable across the board when it comes to voting rights. And you might be asking yourself, why do you even need a Voting Rights Act, right? Why was it even needed in the first place? And what we've seen from a lot of these Republican-led state legislatures in the South in particular is that we have seen on full display why the Voting Rights Act was needed in the first place. Because as soon as that ruling came down, you had places like Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis trying to gerrymander things in an attempt to essentially pick up more congressional seats for Republicans. You saw in Memphis, in Tennessee in particular, where their legislature said, all right, let's redraw the maps, let's redistrict, let's change some things. And they took the city of Memphis and said, all right, let's take this city, which is essentially a majority black city, and I'll give you some facts here in just a moment, and let's split that into 3 congressional districts so that then it dilutes the black vote. Now, and then they say, well, that's just partisanship. That's not really a race-based type thing where we're gerrymandering, so it's just more equal. It's not really has nothing to do with race, and we know that is a bunch of nonsense. Now, how do we know that it's nonsense? We know that it's nonsense because if you go to the U.S. Census Bureau, all right, go to the U.S. Census Bureau website. So I always like to do this. As we talk about things, I want to make sure that you can go back and fact check it. Where am I getting my information from? In this case, when we start talking about Memphis in particular, Memphis, you go to the U.S. Census Bureau, you go to www.census.gov, and you can see it has the actual racial breakdown where 62.9% of all people in Memphis that actually was a part of the census, they identified as black. 62.9, essentially 63% of the population. So it's interesting to me when someone says, oh, well, it's not racially based. Well, what else would you call it? Because why would you need to go in and try to not in this case pack, but to crack the district into 3 different congressional districts, the same city where you're looking at back in 2024, the population estimates for Memphis was 610,000 people, almost 611,000 people. Well, most congressional districts are hovering around 725,000 people for one U.S. congressional district. This city in particular only had 611,000 people. So why do you need to crack that into 3 different congressional districts unless you were trying to dilute the black vote? So the NAACP, for those who may not know, they had this campaign that's come out. This is a national call for black athletes in particular, families, fans, alumni, and consumers to really withhold not only their athletic support, but to withhold their financial support from public institutions in these states that have limited to weaken or that have moved to limit or weaken or essentially erase black voting representation. Now, some of those states, if you want to know the actual 8 that are included, if you go to the NAACP's website, it has on here. But I'm just going to go ahead and share this with you now, and then you can go back and fact check it as well. We look at Alabama, my home state, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee and Texas. OK, now, when you think about those those states in that region of the country. In this region, you think about the Southeastern Conference, but it's not limited to the Southeastern Conference. For example, when you look at South Carolina, some of those public flagship universities, we think about the University of South Carolina and we think about Clemson University as an example. And so they also said, the NAACP says, you should consider HBCUs as an alternative to going to those schools or investing in those schools like South Carolina State, Florida A&M. You think about places like Fort Valley State University, Savannah State University, Albany State. These are HBCUs. Same way, instead of going to LSU, you can go to a place like Southern or Grambling as an example. So you don't have to choose to go to these flagship or predominantly white institutions where we have the state legislatures essentially saying, let's try to do like they did in Memphis. Let's try to crack that apart, or let's try to pack them all into one district. But in this case right now, there are a lot of these Republican-led legislatures that are essentially trying to erase black voting representation, make it so that the black people in those communities can't pick a person of their choosing, which is the whole purpose of the Voting Rights Act to begin with, which was to make sure that the people in those communities, people of color, and particularly black people in their areas, could pick for themselves who they actually wanted representing them. Now, it's not like there are like so many black people in Congress that, they're just taking over. They're not. But there are a number of people in the Congressional Black Caucus. When you think about over 60 people that are actually in there. So right now, just make sure I have my facts straight. You're talking about 62 members in the Congressional Black Caucus for this 119th session of Congress. So let's think about that for a minute. Now, keep in mind, in the U.S. House of Representatives, you're talking about 435 people when it's at full strength. 62 of that 435 is made up of black folks. So it's not like black people have just overrun Congress and they have an overrepresentation in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's not the case. It's not like there's like 50 people in the U.S. Senate that identify as black or African American. So when you see these things happen with these redistricting efforts and people try to mask them as, oh, it's not racially motivated. But when you look at a city like Memphis and they're trying to crack that apart into 3 different congressional districts, knowing that essentially 63% of the population is identifies as black, then we know that it is what it is. Let's just not try to play games. I'm not going to do that. We're not going to do that as a group of constituents. We're just not going to do it. We are not going to get out here and say something and then pretend like it's not what it is. Just not going to do it. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not seeing it in real time. When you have something like what's happened in Tennessee, where you have the state legislature trying to essentially crack apart a city into 3 different congressional districts when the city's population is less than what a normal congressional district would have, we know that it's racially motivated. Now, they may not want to say that out loud because it doesn't sound good to say it out loud, but your actions are proving that's what you want to do. Now, let's get back to this whole thing with the NAACP. Some people, and I've been watching a lot of folks, content creators out there that are saying, well, I don't know if these athletes should be doing this, if it's right for us to put that on them. I don't know if we should be telling young people that they should protest and make these choices. Again, we're talking about choices. No one said that you have to go out and get hit with water hoses again, or that you have to do sit-in somewhere or you have to get dogs sicked on you and all of those things. No one is saying that you need to try to walk across a bridge and then you're going to be violently attacked by a mob. No one is asking young black athletes today in 2026 to do that. We are simply saying, when we look at this out of bounds campaign, what the NAACP is saying, and I really support this, is let's make different choices. Let's just make different choices. We don't have to argue with people. We don't have to yell at folks. We don't even have to march in this case. All we have to do is make different choices, because economic pressure in a capitalistic society is extremely effective, because a capitalistic society is always going to pay attention to what's happening with the capital. So if you are an athlete, a 4-star, 5-star recruit, and you have options, I want to make sure I'm very clear about that. If you are a 4-star or a 5-star athlete in men's basketball or football, and you have multiple scholarship options at different universities outside of these 8 states that we mentioned previously, then you should think about, okay, I can just go play somewhere else. I can just go play somewhere else. I don't have to play in Georgia. I don't have to play at Florida. I don't have to play at LSU. I don't have to play at South Carolina. I don't have to go to Texas. The last national championship was between the University of Miami and Indiana. Indiana won the national title in football. Michigan won the national title in basketball this year. You don't have to play in the South region of the country in order to win a national title. You don't have to play in the Southern region of the country to be a high draft pick in the NBA or the NFL. You can just choose to go somewhere else. Now, some people might say, well, that's too much to put on young people, Dr. Baker. You shouldn't tell them to do that. Well, I just can't get with that argument. And the reason why I can't get with that argument is because we have to also go back and ask ourselves, well, what can 18-year-olds do in this country right now? What choices do they get to make right now in this country? If you didn't play football and you didn't play basketball, what are your options? Now, I'll start even with my own 19-year-old, soon to be 20-year-old. He decided that he wanted to move out on his own and he wanted to have his own place to stay. And guess what I could do about it? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because at the age of 18, here are some things that they can do. At 18, you can actually vote. You gain the right to vote in a federal, state, or local election that was established by the 26th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So we're saying that young people can participate in the democratic process. They can participate in the democratic process, but they're too young to choose to play at a different university. Come on now, let's not talk like that. At 18, you can actually enlist into the military without parental consent. As a veteran myself, I've seen a lot of people that were between the ages of 18 and 20. I actually enlisted and I joined the Army and I went to basic training at the age of 20. So 18-year-olds can enlist in the military. They can serve their country. They can be sent off to war. But they can't choose to go to a different university to play football? What else can 18-year-olds do? They can actually enter into binding contracts. They can have leases, they can have loans, they can actually sign agreements, employment agreements, which a lot of these athletes are doing with this name, image, and likeness, NIL deals that are floating out there for a lot of them. So at 18, you're old enough to sign a contract for 2, 3, 4 years, $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million. So an 18-year-old is old enough to sign a contract, but they can't choose to go to another school. 18-year-olds can also make decisions about their medical care, their own medical decisions. They can consent to treatments, right? They can consent to what they want to do when it comes to their medical records. And oh, by the way, parents no longer have a right to see their medical records at the age of 18. 18-year-olds also are legally responsible for their own actions. So if they commit a crime at 18, they will be charged, if they're arrested, charged, and then they will be convicted if found guilty as an adult. There is no juvenile center for 18-year-olds. Financial independence is another thing that we have to pay attention to. Financial independence. So these people can open up bank accounts. They can get credit cards. They can manage their finances independently but they can't choose to go to a different school? Come on, guys. You see, this argument that they're too young to make a decision about where they want to play football or basketball, and we're putting too much on them, for me, it's a nonsensical argument. It's illogical, because we are telling 18-year-olds, well, you're old enough to vote, you're old enough to go to war, you're old enough to have to go into entering binding contracts, you're old enough to make decisions about your body, you're old enough to be held accountable for your decisions. But somehow choosing to go to a different university to play football, and just simply saying the reason why I'm going to play at Southern Cal instead of playing at LSU is because I don't like what I'm seeing in these state legislatures where they're trying to limit or erase black voting power. Somehow that's beyond the scope of their ability. No one is asking 18 to 22-year-olds to do anything that's outside the scope of their ability. No one is asking them to do something that they couldn't do already. If we're telling 18 to 22-year-olds that you're old enough to sign an NIL deal, whether it be for a year or 2 years, and we're talking about $3, $4, $5 million, but now when it comes to actually making a stand about where you are when it comes to some issues that's impacting black voters, and not only black voters, but really impacting everyone in different places around the country, especially in the southeastern region of the country. You're old enough to vote for the president of the United States, but you're too young to choose to play at a different school. That's why I say that argument, it falls flat for me. And I will say this before we close for today. For a lot of people in my generation, in Gen X, which I've heard from a lot of the Gen Xers in different spaces saying that they're too young, I would say that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that complacency has kicked in for a lot of us in our generation. And now we're telling younger people, well, you're too young for that. You're too young. We don't want to put that much on you. But anything else that you want to do in life, you can move wherever you want to move. You can buy whatever you want to buy. You can enter into contracts. You can join the military. You can go off to war and kill people. But when it comes to choosing to play football at a different university, well, we don't really want to put that on you. We got to get it together on our end and say, you know what? At 18, guess what? 3 years from now, you're going to be 21. You're going to be, in 3 years from that, you'll be 24. What good is it to have an NIL deal if you are seeing that your voting rights are being stripped away? What good is it to make a bunch of money if you're seeing your ability to be a part of the democratic process being ripped away from you, and seeing all of the advancements that our ancestors and the people that came before us see that their efforts are trying to be dismantled in front of your face, but you got the bag? Is that what we're trying to tell our young people? Don't worry about everything else that may impact your life as long as you get the bag. I just think that's a bad message. And we got to do better. If you're old enough to do all of these other things at 18, you're old enough to take a stand and say, you know what, I'm going to go play football somewhere where I'm going to be appreciated for what I bring to the table. You're not going to make money off of me and on Saturdays, and then on Monday try to take away my right to vote. It's time for us to take a stand. And the question is, where do you stand today? So I want you to think about that. We're going to come back and talk more about it in the coming weeks, because I think this is going to pick up steam as we get closer to the actual football season kicking off in the fall. And I think it's going to be very important for us to think about, where do we want to be at when it's time for us to make a decision? Where do you stand? That is the question moving forward.